In the American city of Chicago, Illinois, a large-scale operation by federal agents to combat illegal migrants is ongoing. U.S. President Donald Trump has officially authorized the deployment of approximately 300 National Guard soldiers to help restore order and actively fight crime. Videos have appeared online showing federal agents in balaclavas forcefully pulling migrants out of cars, putting them on the ground and loading them into vans. In addition, during the raids, officers search homes, bring residents outside, and detain them. Representatives of the U.S. Department of Homeland Security state that the operation is aimed at protecting citizens and combating organized crime. However, local authorities, including Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker, call the actions of the federal government illegal. Together with Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson, he has filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration. Officials believe that the deployment of National Guard forces and the raids by federal agents constitute interference in state affairs and a violation of citizens' rights. The mayor of Chicago noted that local authorities did not request the deployment of troops within the city and that such actions are unconstitutional and dangerous. Johnson also announced that all available means would be used to protect the residents of Chicago. It should be noted that Donald Trump is tightening the fight against migrants. He has repeatedly tried to deploy federal troops into the city of Portland, Oregon. And in June, the Trump administration also sent National Guard troops to Los Angeles, where federal agents indeed carried out large-scale raids.
Russia would consider the United States supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine as a serious escalation. However, the Kremlin hopes that U.S. President Donald Trump wants a peaceful resolution. This was stated by Dmitry Peskov, the press secretary of Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. This statement was reported by Russian media. He emphasized that it is important to wait for clearer statements, if any are made, and he reminded that Putin has already expressed his position on this matter.
As for arms supplies, first they happen, and then the statements are made. At least, that's always been the case under the Biden administration. We know this very well. That's it. This time, we'll see. But as for Moscow's position, it was laid out quite unambiguously by President Putin at a recent meeting of the Valdai Discussion Club. Everything was made clear there. This would be a serious escalation, which, however, would not be able to change the situation on the front lines.
He also said that we're talking about missiles that can also be equipped with nuclear warheads. Supposedly, that's yet another reason for a possible escalation. Let me remind you, Putin, in a comment to Russian propagandist Pavel Zarubin, stated that supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine would destroy the positive trends in relations between Russia and the United States.
I said that this would lead to the destruction of our relations, or at least the positive trends that have started to appear in these relations. So I'm just saying what I think. And how things will actually turn out doesn't depend only on us, and not just on me.
At the same time, the commander of the Akhmat Special Forces, Abdi Aladinov, expressed confidence live on Olga Skabeva's propaganda show that Ukraine will receive long-range Tomahawk missiles. Meanwhile, Trump stated that he, quote, has apparently made a decision about supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. He added that he still wants to find out what the Ukrainians will do with these missiles, where they will send them. U.S. President Donald Trump hinted to journalists that he has indeed decided to transfer Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. He made the statement on Monday, October 6th. Journalists asked whether the head of the White House had already made a decision about supplying missiles to Ukraine, to which Trump replied,
"Yes, I kind of made a decision overall, if you think about it. I think I want to find out what they're going to do with them, where they're going to send them, probably. I'd have to ask that question."
When a journalist specifically clarified that Tomahawk cruise missiles actually have an impressive range of about 1,500 miles, which is roughly 2,400 kilometers, that's quite a distance. Trump noted that he does not want an escalation of the war in Ukraine.
No, I know. No, I do want to. I would ask a few questions. I don't want an escalation.
Putin has threatened the U.S. with a complete break in relations if Washington were to supply Ukraine with long-range Tomahawk cruise missiles.
There were questions related, for example, to the discussion of problems with the supply of new weapon systems, including long-range, high-precision systems. These are Tomahawks and so on. I have already said that this will lead to the destruction of our relations, or at the very least, the positive trends that have begun to emerge in these relations.
If Tomahawk missiles are transferred to Ukraine, they will be purchased from the US and paid for by NATO countries. This was reported by Axios, citing a source close to the Ukrainian government. At the same time, the source said that in recent weeks, representatives of the Trump administration have expressed concerns about whether Washington would be able to control how Ukraine uses these missiles. Let us recall that, according to The Telegraph, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, during a closed-door meeting with US President Donald Trump on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly in New York, asked him to transfer Tomahawk missiles. Zelensky stated that they would help convince Putin to come to the negotiating table to discuss a peace agreement.
Putin and Kabaeva's sons live under cover identities. The media report that their last names have been revealed and photos have also been shown. Journalists Roman Badanin and Mikhail Rubin write in their book, The Tsar in Person, that the two sons of Russian President Vladimir Putin and Alina Kabaeva are registered in documents as Ivan and Vladimir Spiridonov. The information was published on October 7th by the Russian Telegram channel of the agency. According to the journalists, the invented surname may have been taken from the patronymic of Putin's paternal grandfather, Vladimir Spiridonovich. The authors of the book write that Kabaeva and Putin spend a significant amount of time together with their two sons at the president's residence in Valdai. According to the journalists from Proect, a separate wooden palace was built there for the former gymnast and her children, as well as a spa center, a children's recreation area, an extensive park, and a staff of attendants. The book also published, for the first time, photos of Ivan and Vladimir, who do appear in public from time to time. Journalists write that Putin's daughters from his first marriage, Maria Vorontsova and Ekaterina Tikhonova, also live under assumed surnames. The second daughter's surname likely comes from her maternal grandmother, Ekaterina Tikhonovna Shkrebneva. Earlier, Russian media reported that Putin's sons are likely being prepared for a career in sports. They train with professional coaches in gymnastics, swimming, and chess. In addition, they are starting to be assigned teachers for general education subjects.
Special Operations Forces fighters thwarted the Russian advance in the Kupiansk direction. A group of soldiers from the 8th Separate Regiment of Special Operations Forces prevented the enemy from advancing through their actions. This was reported on the Telegram channel. It is noted that with the help of strike FPV drones, the enemy was driven into a building, after which operators cleared several buildings where the enemy was located.
As a result, 3 Russian servicemen were eliminated and the rest were forced to retreat.
In the Sumy region, the Ukrainian armed forces used drones to cut off Russian units' ground lines of communication and supply routes, including water. This is stated in the latest report from the Institute for the Study of War. It is noted that the occupiers continued offensive operations in the Sumy direction, but made no progress. Analysts also noted that because Ukrainian drones have cut off all Russian ground lines of communication and supply routes, the northern group of troops holding positions in Yunikivka has been without water for 8 days now. That's why the Russians are collecting rainwater. The report also notes that the military command in the Yunikivka area consists of officers without combat experience. They are stationed at rear headquarters 20 kilometers from the front line and refuse to evacuate the wounded and the dead. At the same time, Russia has depleted more than half of its stockpiles of armored vehicles and artillery, said OSINT researcher Jumpiai, who analyzed satellite images and open-source data. To continue the war against Ukraine, the Russians have started pulling old equipment out of storage. For example, they have restored almost 5,000 tanks out of the pre-war total of 7,342, leaving only 19% of the pre-war number of vehicles in storage. The artillery depots have also been significantly depleted. Out of the pre-war 23,000 units, including mortars and anti-aircraft artillery, only about 39% remain at the bases. They have restored 14,000 units. At the same time, Jumpiai notes cases where Russians abandon military vehicles for civilian cars and go on the offensive. This is a phenomenon the researcher links to the likely limited availability of operational military vehicles.
Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has effectively admitted the failed advance of the occupying forces in Ukraine. He acknowledged the minor successes of the Russian army at a meeting with the leadership of the Ministry of Defense and the General Staff on October 7th. According to Putin, since the beginning of this year, the aggressor country's army has occupied 4,900 square kilometers of territory and 212 settlements. These figures indicate a slowdown in the pace of the offensive. The stated numbers, in fact, amount to less than 1% of Ukrainian territory. Despite the Kremlin's constant and often exaggerated claims of strategic successes, the advance of Russian forces is truly insignificant compared to the immense amount of resources the aggressor country is currently spending on the ongoing war against Ukraine. Meanwhile, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Ryabkov stated that the significant momentum for resolving the ongoing war against Ukraine, which had initially emerged after the crucial meeting between Russian dictator Vladimir Putin and US President Donald Trump in Alaska, has now been completely exhausted. In the spirit of Russian propaganda, he blamed the exhaustion of this momentum on supporters of fighting the war to the last Ukrainian, among whom he included Europeans. Ryabkov also commented on the issue of supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. He clearly stated that without the necessary software and the powerful launchers, the missiles themselves are essentially just empty shells. In a manipulative tone, the deputy head of the foreign ministry of the aggressor country called on the US to approach the issue of supplying Tomahawk missiles with sobriety and reason.
We, of course, strongly urge the American leadership and the United States military to approach this entire complex situation with extreme sobriety, profound sensibility, and a deep sense of responsibility.
Let us recall that on August 15th, a meeting took place between American leader Donald Trump and Russian dictator Vladimir Putin in Alaska. However, it did not lead to any progress in resolving the war. On the contrary, the aggressor country continued to escalate the situation. Soon after, Trump stated that he was disappointed with Putin's actions.
Putin celebrated his birthday for the first time in the company of military personnel in St. Petersburg. First, with them, he visited the Peter and Paul Cathedral, the tomb of the Russian emperors, FSB Director Alexander Bortnikov, Defense Ministry and General Staff leadership, and military grouping commanders.
I decided to start our meeting here because this is the resting place of those people who, in essence, created modern Russia.
After visiting the cathedral, Putin held a meeting with the military leadership. Putin stated that he made the right decision by starting his war of aggression against Ukraine. And this is despite the enormous losses. Already in the first year of the war with Ukraine, Russia's losses exceeded the losses of the USSR and Russia in all wars after World War II combined.
The crucial decisions that were made in February of 2022 were absolutely correct and remarkably timely.
In his report to the military, Putin exaggerated the successes of the Russian army at the front. The dictator stated that in 2025, the army, as he put it, liberated almost 5,000 square kilometers and 212 settlements. However, the figures announced by Putin are about 1.5 times higher than the visually confirmed successes of the Russian army. According to data from the Ukrainian analytical project Deep State, this year the Russian army has captured about 3,000 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory. Interestingly, Putin's trip to St. Petersburg was not announced in advance. After the arrival of 2 presidential planes in St. Petersburg on his birthday, Nevsky Prospect was paralyzed by traffic jams rated 10 out of 10. The Russian leader has visited his hometown on his birthday multiple times, but this was the first time he met with the military on that day. According to Kremlin reports, for the past 2 years, Putin's official birthday events have taken place at the Novo Ogaryovo residence near Moscow.